Listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is David Frothingham, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, December 7th, 2025 issue of the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The top headline in this day's Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News reads, "What America Can Learn from Finland. One of the world's most successful democracies offers powerful lessons," by William Doyle of the Chicago Tribune. On July 2nd, 1776, a Finnish-American man held the destiny of the United States in his hands. The scene was the hall in Philadelphia that hosted the Second Continental Congress of the 13 American colonies of British America. The man of destiny was John Morton, Speaker of the Pennsylvania Assembly, and the swing vote in his state delegation that could create the United States of America. If Morton voted no, the influential colony would be recorded as opposed to independence. This could deal a fatal blow to the infant nation by delaying or dashing hopes for a vote for independence from Great Britain that was unopposed by any of the colonies. If he said yes, the Pennsylvania delegation would flip to the 3-2 pro-independence majority, creating unstoppable national momentum for a break with King George III's government. But it would place Morton and his fellow delegates at risk of some condemnation by many constituents who were pro-Crown loyalists or independent skeptics, and in real danger of being executed if captured by British forces. The maximum penalty for treason against the king at that time was to be hung by the neck until the edge of death, then disemboweled and torn into 4 pieces while still alive. Morton made his decision. He voted for the independence resolution, and Pennsylvania's yea vote in the roll call of states enabled its unopposed passage. This was the moment that the United States of America came into existence. With the help of spirits from Finland, Morton's father, grandfather, mother, and wife were all of Finnish descent. The country that Morton and his colleagues created on July 2nd, 1776 became the wealthiest, most powerful nation on earth. And the society that Morton's distant relatives built in Finland also became one of the world's most successful democracies. For a nation of only 5.6 million people, brutal winter weather, and few natural resources other than trees, Finland's achievements are striking. Finland ranks as the #1 world's freest nation in the Freedom House's 2025 report, the happiest nation for 8 years in a row, the developed country with the most skilled adult population, and the nation that leads the world in progress toward achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including health and well-being, gender equality, and ending poverty. How has this happened? One reason is that Finland is, in the words of Helsinki-based journalist Anu Partanen and Trevor Corson in the New York Times, a capitalist paradise, a nation committed to free markets and capitalism. According to the Heritage Foundation's 2025 Index of Economic Freedom, Finland has the best property rights in the world and scores higher than the United States in economic and investment freedom, judicial effectiveness, fiscal health, and government integrity. Taxes on personal incomes are significantly higher on average than in the United States, but they replace many large private expenses carried by U.S. households and businesses, and property taxes are lower. The national corporate tax rate in Finland will be lowered from the current 20% to 18% in 2027, which compares with about 25% in the United States, when state taxes are included. While Finns complain about their taxes, in the end, many people consider them worth it, in exchange for a very strong social safety net, excellent universal public health care, and free, high-quality education through university. Medical bankruptcy, the #1 cause of bankruptcy in the U.S., is almost unheard of, as is the long-term stress associated with crushing student debt. Rates of violent crime, homelessness, and hunger are extremely low. Finland is, as Partanen puts it, a well-being state. Finns don't have much to say publicly about religious values such as compassion, charity, and humility. They just act on them. There is some political polarization in Finland, and in the parliament, debates over immigration and the economy, stuck in a cycle of low growth and relatively high unemployment, are increasingly intense. But personal animosity in government plays out at a far lower intensity than in the United States, for example, and this may be one of the most powerful lessons Americans can learn from Finland. When Finnish center-right politician Alexander Stubb won the presidential election last year, he headed for his Green Party opponent Pekka Haavisto's election night vigil for a surprise joint appearance. As the crowd cheered a standing ovation, the two men hugged, and Stubb told him, "You are one of the nicest people I have ever met." On the eve of America's 250th anniversary, Morton and Finland can remind us that now is a good time for Americans to declare independence from the tyranny of hating each other. William Doyle is an American writer and TV producer based in Helsinki. In 2015, he was appointed as a Fulbright Scholar to Finland. The next headline on the first page of this day's Viewpoints section reads, "Slashing Immigration Imperils Social Security." This is an article by Ronald Brownstein. President Trump's renewed crusade against legal immigration poses a direct threat to the long-term financial interests of the older white Americans who remain his core supporters. Since the tragic shooting of 2 National Guard troops in Washington, D.C., last week by a man from Afghanistan, Trump has directed a fusillade of invective not only at undocumented immigrants, refugees, and foreigners seeking asylum, but at all of the nation's foreign-born population, nearly 52 million people. He has pledged to retrench multiple avenues for legal immigration and to remove an untold number of immigrants already in the U.S. through a process of reverse migration, a phrase associated with far-right European parties. Trump's call for such restrictions has a powerful appeal to his base voters' cultural anxieties about a changing America. Majorities of Republicans and Trump voters tell pollsters they believe the large number of immigrants admitted to the U.S. in recent years threatens the nation's traditional values and customs. But seriously reducing, much less reversing, immigration to the U.S. directly threatens the economic interests of those same voters. If Trump succeeds in slashing legal immigration over the long term, he will virtually guarantee future cuts in Social Security and Medicare, the social safety net programs for the elderly that are funded by payroll taxes on workers. Without immigration, census data analyzed by demographer William Frey of the Brookings Metro think tank indicate that working-age population, defined as adults between the ages of 18 and 64, will very quickly start to shrink, thus reducing the number of workers available to fund the programs. That's an ominous prospect when the number of seniors is projected to rapidly increase and the programs already face looming financial strains. Immigrants are indispensable to the stability of those social safety net programs because the growth of the native-born population has dramatically slowed. As recently as 2007, there were nearly 1.8 births for every death in America. In 2023, the latest year for which figures were available, the U.S. saw only about 1.16 births for every death. The ratio was even lower during the pandemic. Non-Hispanic whites have experienced more deaths than births since 2016. Natural increase will still add to the country's population for a while because Black, Asian American, mixed race, and Hispanic Americans continue to experience more births than deaths. But the Census Bureau projects that by 2038, deaths will exceed births for the nation as a whole, and through the 2040s, that deficit will reach 500,000 or more annually. Given those trends, immigration basically determines whether the population will grow or not, says Jeffrey Passel, a senior demographer at the nonpartisan Pew Research Center. A declining population might not be so damaging, Frey points out, if all the different age groups shrunk at the same rate. The problem is that in a low immigration future, the youth and working age population would be shrinking as the final baby boomers and first members of Gen X age into retirement. Using the census data, Frey has calculated that if all immigration were stopped, America's working age population would fall by about 5% through 2035. Even under the reduced levels of immigration that the U.S. experienced during Trump's first term, the working age population would fail to increase at all. Under either of those scenarios, Fry projects the youth population, younger than 18, would decline even faster than the working age cohort. Meanwhile, calculations Fry provided to me from the latest census data show that numbers of seniors will rise by about 20% just through 2035. Over the next 2 decades, Fry forecasts that the number of seniors older than 80 who generate much larger bills per person for Medicare than people in their 60s and 70s will double. More seniors and fewer workers are a recipe for cuts in Social Security and Medicare, since the shrinking number of future workers could not realistically bear the taxes that would be required to sustain benefits at current levels. Beyond the fiscal pressure on Social Security and Medicare, restricting immigration would also reduce the number of younger workers available to physically provide care for the expanding senior population, since immigrants account for nearly 3 in 10 home health care workers. All of that would directly threaten the financial, not to mention the physical, well-being of Trump's electoral base. For all of Trump's success at diversifying his electoral coalition in 2024, exit polls suggest that white people ages 45 and older still provided nearly 3/5 of his votes, well above their share of all ballots. Older, blue-collar white voters are equally central to House Republicans, most of whom now represent primarily white working-class districts where the median income lags the national average. No one in either party has tried on a sustained basis to explain how immigration restrictions would threaten Social Security and Medicare, but Trump is opening the GOP to those arguments at a time when the party is more reliant than ever on working-class voters who need the programs now or in the future. Trump has long recognized that the working-class base he has built for the Republican Party prizes Social Security and Medicare and has, since his first campaign in 2016, steered the GOP away from its earlier attempts to directly retrench those programs. But his attempts to curtail legal immigration will have the effect of defunding the programs he has claimed to protect. Trump will not be on the ballot again, but the party he has remade in his image will have to contend with the fallout. While the economy effectively absorbed the large number of both legal and undocumented migrants admitted under President Joe Biden, that surge created undeniable social strains in many of the cities where they were concentrated. The broad backlash against that experience, even among many established immigrant communities, makes clear that maintaining a secure border, as Trump has achieved, must be the foundation of any politically viable immigration policy. But ensuring that immigration moves through legal channels is very different from narrowing or closing those channels altogether. Without a replenishing flow of immigration, the U.S. inexorably will grow older and smaller, and that isn't likely to meet anyone's definition of making America great. On the next page, in the opinion section of this day's Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News, the editorial headline reads, "Small Scale, Big Impact. Science supports state bill to address toxic emissions from lawn equipment." And there's a picture of Sean Glyco using a leaf blower to clear his yard of leaves in Snyder in 2024. Gas-powered lawn equipment produces more pollution than many people realize. By Derek G., Buffalo News. These are the times that try the resolve of states like New York. State governments that prioritize lifting up the poor, providing decent health care, and cleaning up the environment are seeing those efforts consistently undermined by the Trump administration. Such attacks must be met with resistance. It's the only thing that worked with the schoolyard bully, and it's the only possible response to the bully-in-chief sitting in the White House. Instead of slowing down, New York should forge ahead with policies that mitigate, as far as possible, the damage being inflicted by a federal government that has abandoned so many responsible and important goals. A bill now under construction in the New York State Legislature may at first seem to address a mundane issue, lawn care, but given the data, toxic emissions from landscaping equipment are anything but trivial. New legislation, as proposed by Assemblymember Stephen Otis, a Democrat from Rye, and Senator Liz Krueger, a Democrat from Manhattan, that would consider such emissions by providing rebates for purchasing electric equipment should be part of a robust policy to control greenhouse gas emissions across the state, however they occur. Now is not the time to retreat on any part of New York's environmental mission. As the News' Robert Gavin reported, gas-powered lawn equipment, leaf blowers, mowers, and trimmers produces high levels of carbon dioxide and air pollutants across the state. Of the estimated 1.37 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions New York produced with lawn equipment alone in 2020, Erie County's share was 68,282 tons. That's the yearly equivalent of what would be caused by 15,032 cars. The state's combined total equals the yearly emissions of more than 300,000 cars. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. On a smaller scale, some studies estimate that using a gas-powered leaf blower for as little as 1 hour produces as much pollution as driving a car for 1,100 miles. But more significant than any of these eye-opening comparisons is the type of emissions this equipment produces, which is worse than anything emitted by a car. Besides carbon dioxide, methane, and fine particulates and nitrogen oxides, these small, inefficient engines, which rely on a mix of oil and gas, emit volatile organic compounds like benzene and formaldehyde, known cancer-causing agents. No one who's ever been in the vicinity of a gas-powered leaf blower will be shocked that it can cause noise pollution levels high enough to have human health impacts. In addition to its lack of emissions, electric equipment is much quieter. California placed an outright ban on the sale of new gas-powered leaf blowers and other such small engine devices in 2024. In 2023, Colorado adopted legislation that provides a 30% discount on electric landscaping equipment, including snowblowers. Financial incentives are necessary to coax landscaping companies to switch to this equipment. Many individual consumers have made the change, but small landscaping companies with slim profit margins might find it difficult to make the initial purchases of new electric machinery. However, landscaping workers are much more at risk from this pollution than individual homeowners, owing to their daily use of the equipment at close range for hours at a time. According to EPA studies, lawn care workers are more likely to suffer from depression and are more likely to have cardiological disease, breast cancer, and prostate cancer. Those who scoff at the idea of legislation about lawn equipment should remember that toxic air is toxic air, regardless of what produces it. As it is, the health of the country's environment is under attack, as it has not been in decades. In a recent move, the Trump administration is proposing to roll back vehicle emission standards, thus increasing car-created pollution and decreasing fuel efficiency. New York should not be intimidated by these senseless policies. Through maintaining the course set by its climate legislation, regulating major polluters, and enacting legislation like that proposed by Otis and Kruger, the state can give its residents the cleaner air they deserve. The next headline in the opinion section is under the banner My View and reads Rattling, Roaring Along on the IRC by Larry Behan, who must be one of the few to remember riding the IRC. The IRC was formerly known as the International Railway Company, though we never called it that or knew what it meant. To us, the IRC meant trolley cars that traveled the streets of Buffalo and took us wherever we needed to go. They were big, boxy affairs, 40 feet long, 10 feet high, with 15-foot rods called trolleys that traveled backwards at an angle to overhead wires that conducted electricity to their powerful engines. Mischievous boys were tempted to run up behind a trolley and yank the cord that pulled the rolling wheel of the trolley off the wire and stall the car. I never heard of anyone doing that. The front of the car was equipped with iron bars that, on a locomotive, we would have called a cowcatcher. These green and yellow behemoths rolled on steel tracks laid in beds of red cobblestones that ran down the center of every major Buffalo street. They ran on reliable schedules every 10 or 15 minutes, with stops every 2 or 3 blocks. You could hear them coming a few blocks away, with their rattle and roar and bells jangling, all resonating in their big, hollow insides. Longitudinal wicker benches ran along each side of the interior for half of their length, with side-by-side seats the rest of the way. A special treat for teenagers was to laugh and horse around while crowded into the U-shaped bench that fitted the rear of the car. Leather hoops hung from the ceilings for use on crowded days, when half the passengers were forced to stand. They were lifesavers as the cars rocked and rattled around curves and on fast straightaways. Trolley stops were indicated by painted signs and sometimes placard schedules on utility poles. When the car rattled to its stop, the door slid open and a wooden platform folded down with a clunk to help in the climb up into the vehicle. There was a metal pole to assist. Just inside, the conductor turned from his job of driving to collect fares or accept and distribute paper transfers. Conductors wore blue uniforms with change machines suspended from their belts around their waists. They greeted regular passengers. "Hi, Hank, how's the new dog?" Or, "Hello, Miss Murphy, nice hat." He did all his work standing. Driving looked simple. Start, speed up, stop, all done with a foot-long horizontal lever. Rarely he went out front to switch to a new track. Fares were 3 cents for kids and 10 cents for adults. Our family went to Crystal Beach via the IRC. The four of us boarded the number 8 car at Rodney in Maine and rode all the way downtown, where we boarded the Crystal Beach boat, spent a day riding roller coasters, touring the funhouse, and picnicking. On Saturdays, my sister and I took the number 23 Fillmore car from Rodney to Northampton, where my grandparents lived. We'd spend the morning at Mrs. Warehouser's Story Hour at the Buffalo Museum of Science down the street from their house, and on the way home, stop for a bologna sandwich and a hug. The IRC became the NFT. The trolleys turned orange, then disappeared, and were replaced by buses and then by underground trains. Now the old diesel buses are being replaced by quiet, clean electric buses, but I still miss the jangle, the rattle, and the roar. Under the banner Another Voice, State Legislation, at the bottom of page 2 of the Viewpoints section, the headline reads, "Hochul should sign Medical Aid in Dying Act," by Melissa Milch. As a lifelong Western New Yorker and devoted Buffalo Bills fan, I believe that if the Bills stick together and work hard with a singular purpose, they have a real shot at reaching and winning the Super Bowl. As the daughter of Dr. Robert Milch, who co-founded Hospice Buffalo more than 40 years ago, I'm proud to be a part of another team that has a singular purpose. I'm talking about the Advocates for New York becoming the next state to authorize medical aid in dying. This team has been fighting for more than a decade to pass the Medical Aid in Dying Act, which would allow a terminally ill adult with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live, as certified by 2 doctors, to request a prescription that they could take at a time of their choosing to end their pain and suffer and die peacefully. End their pain and suffering and die peacefully. My father, Bob Milch, was a proud member of that team until his death in 2021 from metastatic cancer. Throughout his career, his focus was always on his patients, many of whom were days, weeks, or months from death, and how he could help them maintain the best quality of life while easing their pain and suffering. He spent the better part of the last decade of his life, advocating for medical aid in dying. He felt so strongly about passing this law that he was working on the issue from his hospice bed. When speaking with my sister, he told her that his only fear was to die suffering. I'm still devastated that even the best care from his former colleagues he suffered. My father's passion for helping people through pain and suffering at the end of their lives is why I and so many members of my family continue to be members of this team. Despite grief and sorrow, thousands of advocates across New York have pushed on, never taking our eyes off the ball. This year, the Medical Aid in Dying Act passed both houses of the legislature. Now it all comes down to our state's quarterback, Governor Kathy Hochul. We know where Hochul stands when it comes to the bills. We don't know where she stands when it comes to patient autonomy at the end of life. If the governor signs the Medical Aid in Dying Act into law, dying New Yorkers who want this option can end their lives peacefully, without suffering, surrounded by their loved ones. For us, this year could bring the most poignant win of them all. Melissa Milch lives in Williamsville. On page 3 of this day's Viewpoint section, the first headline reads, "Does anyone even know why we should all dress respectfully?" By Froma Harrop. Sean Duffy's entreaty to dress with respect on airlines rapidly ran into some turbulence. The Transportation Secretary's request had a bumpy touchdown, landing so close to Donald Trump boorishly telling a female reporter on Air Force One, "Quiet, piggy." Duffy's boss often struggles to maintain the thinnest veneer of courtliness, a failing no amount of fine tailoring can disguise. Nonetheless, Duffy noting a degradation of civility among air travelers is on the mark, and so is his contention that flying would be more pleasant if grown-ups behaved better, which would include not wearing pajamas on flights. The Federal Aviation Administration reported that 1,240 unruly passenger cases last year. That doesn't include unaccountable incidents of mere rudeness or simply playing the eyesore in dirty sweatpants. Testing reactions to Duffy's plea centered on anger at the declining quality of today's commercial air travel. One passionate defense of ditching a dress code appeared in, of all places, Vogue magazine. The article titled, "I Will Start Dressing Respectfully When Airlines Start Respecting Me," took on a Karen-esque air. The concept of being shamed out of dressing for comfort in this moment, the writer complained bitterly, feels beyond the pale. First off, it's not about you personally, and the notion that one must dress down to be comfortable is patently phony. No one is suggesting that this writer wear a taffeta dress and high heels on her next cross-Pacific flight. Neat pants and a clean top will fill the dress with respect bill. Dear Vogue magazine, you are catering to a less formal readership than the come fly with me generations, but hey, why don't you throw in a bone for your advertisers? Numerous critics of Duffy's campaign cite cramped seating, canceled flights, and other perceived declines in quality of service as excuses for their acting out. Thing is, none of the above causes for displeasure has any idea what you're wearing. Sticking one's tongue out at executives who don't see you also has no effect. Furthermore, bad weather is sometimes at fault. What completely misses the point is that we dress respectfully for other people, for fellow passengers, for airline workers trying to perform a tough job. The personnel who take the biggest brunt of passenger disrespect are the poor flight attendants. And herein lies a story. I knew an old guy, somewhere in his 80s, who was decidedly not rich. Frank always flew steerage class, but whenever he took a flight, he would wear his blazer, a pressed shirt, and a tie. He was shaved, and whatever hair he had left stayed neatly combed. During one flight, Frank wanted another ginger ale, and so he walked to the back of the plane where refreshments lived, and the flight attendants gathered. Frank was gone a long time, and because of his age, I began worrying. It turns out that the attendants, mainly women, were fussing over the gentleman, telling him how nicely he was dressed and how they wished other male passengers would do likewise. Frank returned to his seat bearing several cans of ginger ale. Complaints that airlines stuff passengers into cramped seats, cancel flights, and charge for stale sandwiches have merit, but such causes for discontent will go unheeded as long as passengers agree to keep paying for the service they receive, and in many cases choose it for being the cheapest option. Going back to where we started, there's no escaping the dissonance of leaders at the highest level delighting in crude behavior, but low standards are something to rise above, not copy. The headline on this page reads, "Hegseth's ludicrous fog of war excuse is not a valid defense," by Susan Estrich. The quote-unquote fog of war is Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's latest explanation for what was going on with the second strike on the boat in the Caribbean. He told a cabinet meeting, "I did not personally see survivors. The thing was on fire. It exploded. There's fire. There's smoke. This is called the fog of war." Not exactly, according to military experts. The term has reportedly come to be used by military experts to describe the incomplete and imperfect information that officers and troops must process in the thick of battle. Officers in training learn the term almost instantly, Professor Derek Grossman of USC told the New York Times. That's part of warfighting, to adapt on the fly. It is not a defense to war crimes. Maybe I'm in a fog too, but something about this administration's posture leaves me very confused. It seems that someone knew there were survivors, and someone gave an order for a second strike, an order which, depending on what a full investigation shows, never should have been authorized, given, or followed. Bipartisan lawmakers in both House and Senate have vowed to get to the bottom of this. Make no mistake, this is serious stuff. These look very much like classic war crimes, with no extenuating circumstances that would mandate leaving no survivors. It will be a test of Republicans' loyalty to President Trump's and Trump's to Hegseth. This comes, of course, Against the backdrop of growing criticism of this administration's undeclared war on Venezuela that has targeted boats in the area supposedly carrying drugs and has cost dozens of lives. Who declared a war to be carried out by execution-style hits on these boats? Are we, as the first of what will surely be many such lawsuits filed, claim, targeting innocent fishermen instead of drug traffickers? And suppose we're really concerned with drugs flooding into our country. What in the world is the Trump administration doing pardoning the ex-president of Honduras who is credited with flooding America with cocaine? Why him? Why now? We pardon the kingpin and execute 2 surviving crew members clinging to the side of a boat. How would you explain that? What fog of what war? Maybe it's a reflection of the tough week he and Hegseth are having, but Trump has been off on especially crazy rants, which can only make you wonder. The craziest, perhaps, was his repurposing of a conspiracy video from the thoroughly discredited Alex Jones that had Michelle Obama stealing former President Joe Biden's auto pen to grant last-minute pardons to key officials. This among some 160 posts from the president on Monday night, going strong until midnight. One of his other targets was Senator Mark Kelly, the decorated veteran and astronaut who was one of the 6 Democratic veterans who made the now infamous videotape telling military members that they have a duty not to follow unlawful orders. That is, of course, the law. Nothing controversial about it. When I first decided to write about the attacks on Kelly and the others, I wondered if I was taking it too seriously. Clearly, anyone could see that their speech was protected. That was before the president accused them of treason and Hegseth's Defense Department announced an investigation of Kelly. And that was before we knew about someone ordering a second strike. That was clearly on the president's mind. Mark Kelly and the group of unpatriotic politicians were wrong to do what they did, and they know it, Trump wrote on Truth Social. Nobody is trying to get soldiers to disobey the president when he gives lawful orders. What they're trying to do is make sure that the orders that come from this administration are indeed lawful and not simply a product of, quote-unquote, the fog of war. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Viewpoints section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. On the next page under the Viewpoints banner is Everybody's Column, Letters from Our Readers. The first letter comes from Laura Grube in Buffalo. Misinformation about all electric buildings. Gas companies and home builders have been spreading misinformation about the upfront operating costs of electric homes, distorting and cherry-picking reports in hearings and in lobbying. Quote, law banning natural gas in new buildings delayed, November 18th. It appears that Governor Kathy Hochul is being duped by this misinformation. The result will undermine her affordability efforts as we, ratepayers, are forced to continue paying for the expansion of fracked gas pipes and other hardware. A study recently filed with the Public Service Commission thoroughly documents that all electric homes are cheaper to build and operate than traditional ones, notwithstanding developers' complaints. President Trump's tariffs on building materials like lumber and aluminum play an outsized role in raising costs. All electric homes can save residents hundreds to thousands of dollars annually and provide a risk-free environment without toxic emissions from gas appliances that have been shown to exacerbate childhood asthma and other ills. These homes are so efficient that they barely affect the grid, unlike huge data centers, which are poor economic development choices, or crypto mining, which is worse. The price of gas swings wildly and is predicted to double over the next year. The enormous cost of building out gas infrastructure will be borne by ratepayers for years, and we'll be stuck with pipelines, including the connections from homes to gas lines, added to bills of present gas customers not paid by the utility, long into the future. The next letter comes from Pat Frey in Buffalo. Utility rates are out of control. Every month, I absolutely dread opening my electric and gas bill. With over 1 million New York households at least 2 months behind in their utility bills, I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way. We're already facing a utility affordability crisis in New York, and I recently read an article about another big increase coming our way. Enough is enough. Residential utility consumers need an advocate at the table fighting for us when utility rate increases are being decided at the Public Service Commission. For too long, this process has been dominated by the utility companies and big industrial users with deep pockets to engage in these complex proceedings. Fortunately, the state legislature recently passed a bill, A 2468, that would help level the playing field by creating the State Office of the Utility Consumer Advocate, an independent entity dedicated to fighting on behalf of residential ratepayers in utility rate cases and other matters impacting the affordability and reliability of our utility service. Governor Kathy Hochul has been spending a lot of time talking about making New York more affordable. If she's serious about it, she should start by standing up for utility consumers and signing this bill into law. The next letter comes from Dan Longto in Buffalo. Sinatra has run out of excuses. How many promises does developer Nick Sinatra get to break before the powers in charge of his Heritage Point project realize he's never going to finish it? Right now, it's like he's Lucy promising Charlie Brown she won't pull the ball away. It looks awful. What should be a beautiful building enhancing Canalside is just a rusted eyesore. It's far beyond time to take some action. Make him either finish the project or get out. The next letter comes from Diamond Milanez in Buffalo. Holidays are hardest for those in need. Holiday seasons are meant to be shared with family and friends, people you enjoy spending time with, people who bring laughter and joy. But holiday seasons are a financial stressor for lower-income families. About 14% of Americans faced with food insecurity in 2024, which means about 18 million people didn't have access to enough food or didn't know when or what their next meal was going to be. The USDA collects data and research about food insecurity throughout the United States to help the food crisis lower income families face. With the implementation of programs like SNAP and TFAP, low-income families had access to food. Now that the USDA has decided to end its annual food insecurity survey, families who struggle with food insecurity won't be able to express hardships they face obtaining food. The working class is struggling. During holiday seasons, families can barely provide food, nor can they buy gifts. Families who struggle with food insecurity tend to skip meals on an everyday basis to make food last longer. November was the start of hardship for families just trying to make ends meet. We need to create a food assistance program specifically for the holiday months to help lessen the burden lower-income families face. We as a collective need to end hunger. The next letter comes from Phil Zimmer in Jamestown. Americans should not fear their government. Quote, I lose my liberty in that moment, says Geraldo Ortiz, an American citizen who has been picked up twice while protesting in Charlotte. I was so nervous when I got home. I was crying like a baby, and it was so terrible, he adds in an article appearing in The Guardian. Critics describe the agent's actions as indiscriminate at best and deliberately designed to instill fear in the community at worst, notes writer George Cheedy. The agents also attempted to raid an after-school program in Charlotte, prompting a program spokesman to contend that the goal was to instill fear on the part of everyone. The agents even raided a Latino church during a service and arrested one individual in front of the congregation, writes Cheedy. Is this what our forefathers fought for in the Revolutionary War, against an uncaring and autocratic government based in Great Britain? It is time for all of us to pay attention, write our elected officials, and get involved in bringing our country back on course. The next letter comes from Deanne Plonka in Buffalo. Trump is bringing shame to Americans. A recent letter writer claims to be a mouthpiece for POTUS supporters, endorsing all he's doing and lauding his performance. The writer remarks on a few points of supposed success, which are much thornier in reality. The negotiated settlement in the Middle East, a paper document outlining items not many actually want to do or enforce. Removing undocumented migrants includes violent abductions of U.S. citizens with no due process, nor do many detainees have any criminal record. The successful battling of drug cartels, Extrajudicial killings attacking vessels in international waters are state-sanctioned murder. The reworking trade deals has indeed been a complete and abject failure, with unintended consequences even as voters are more than miffed about. Bragging about the surge in ICE applicants is such a strange metric to be proud of, but the writer may want to also sign up when they offer up to a $50,000 bonus. The actual hiring, however, has struggled as candidates are unable to pass tests on immigration laws, unable to pass physical fitness tests, unable to pass drug tests, and prior criminal history disqualifies many. Curiously, the writer has excluded anything Epstein-related. This cover-up should shock all of us with its abject, horrific abuse of children. One can wonder who is going to continue to brag about this president's irrefutable achievements when he continues to shame us all, personally benefiting to the tune of billions of dollars. The next column presents hints from Heloise. Cleaning grease off of your hands. Dear Heloise, I am 71 years old and recently found an amazing way to clean my dirty, greasing hands and forearms. The car wash I used was handing out free microfiber cloths to wipe down your car. I used one to clean my hands, and with a little dish soap, my hand came out amazingly clean. It pulls the grime right out and works so much better than a brush. I've struggled with this for years. From Rod, via email. Thank you notes. Dear Heloise, do you want to encourage your grandchildren to write thank you notes for birthday gifts? Buy them inexpensive packages of thank you note cards with envelopes and give them to your grandchild or their parent near their birthday. You can even include a book of stamps. By having the material available, I find that my grandchildren are more likely to write thank you notes. In addition to teaching them etiquette, it helps them improve their writing skills and remember what each friend or relative gave them. A win-win. Nancy Pearson in St. Louis. Magnificent magnets. Dear Heloise, I have trouble fastening my necklaces, so my granddaughter put magnetic clasps on my necklaces. Now I get them on without any trouble. I think all jewelers should put magnetic clasps on their necklaces. It's so helpful. Eleanor T. in Omaha, Nebraska. Eleanor, I'm happy that this works for you. Magnetic jewelry is handy, but there are reasons why magnets are not widely used on jewelry. People with pacemakers should not use magnetic jewelry because it can interfere with the performance of the unit. Also, if you are pregnant, you should talk to your doctor about wearing magnetic jewelry. In addition, kids can be fascinated by magnets. However, a magnet can come out of its housing, and ingesting a magnet is dangerous. Magnets around credit cards, the jury is out, but keep them separate to be safe. From Heloise. Children in the car. Dear readers, how can people forget their child in the back seat of a car? It seems impossible, but it can happen. The child falls asleep during a long ride into work, minds then wander, and the child gets left in the car. Here are some hints to help you not forget your child in the car. Put the child's toy, blanket, or bottle in the front seat. Leave your bag, phone, or briefcase in the back seat. Practice this mantra, look before you lock. Position the car seat in the middle of the back seat instead of on one side. You can see the child better. If you are not following your usual routine, pay extra attention to your actions and surroundings, and be sure to educate everyone who cares for your kids about the danger of car deaths. From Heloise. Moving on to the Buffalo Next section, which is a guide to a changing Buffalo Niagara economy. The lead headline is After the Flood. Spectrum Health still recovering from 2022 blizzard. Damage to primary site, disrupted services, presented opportunity. This article is by Jonathan D. Epstein. The Christmas blizzard was raging 3 years ago when Cindy Volker learned that the building alarm was going off at night to alert her that something was amiss at her social service agency's primary facility in Buffalo. But with travel bans in place and the organization's maintenance manager stuck in his home in Angola with no power, Volker took matters into her own hands. The newly installed CEO of Spectrum Health and Human Services threw on boots and snow pants, hopped in her family's Toyota 4Runner with her husband, a doctor at Buffalo Medical Group, and drove down Main Street from their home near Damon College, past stranded cars and very few people. Only one lane had been plowed on Main, and even that ended at the corner in front of the building. When they got to the building, the 3-story stone and brick structure was covered in shimmering ice where the water was pouring out the windows. Things were pretty horrible, she said. The water was just rolling out of the building from the top floor and just freezing. You would think you were looking at an igloo. Parking in front, they plowed their bodies through 4 feet of snow to the back entrance. Once inside, they waded almost 2 feet of frigid water into the basement, where they struggled to turn the giant wheel that would shut off the flow. When we opened the door, it was like a waterfall, Volker recalled. It was hard to turn the wheel. It cracked while we were working on it. But they ultimately succeeded. The torrent stopped, and the water eventually cleared. But the damage was already done. The facility that housed many of Spectrum's services had been flooded and frozen and could no longer be occupied. Spectrum executives scrambled to find alternative temporary locations nearby so the agency could continue to serve its clients, but at half their capacity. Within 2 months, Spectrum and its contractors had begun interior demolition and reconstruction of the flooded building. Soaring costs caused delay. But the work didn't go smoothly. Costs soared, and the nonprofit agencies soon ran out of money, forcing an abrupt halt 1 year ago to the $22 million project by Earhart Development Group, which winterized and closed up the building to secure it from further damage or vandalism. Since then, the building at 1280 Main Street has sat vacant and dark next to the busy Deltasonic gas station and car wash, while Spectrum worked feverishly to get more funding, even as it struggled to handle its clients from multiple sites with less space. Now the nonprofit agency is hoping to resume the work after securing another $13 million in grant money. Once it's finished, Spectrum expects to double its capacity from prior to the storm, with a more efficient layout and the addition of a second-floor mezzanine level. Officials hope to reopen the clinic and other direct client services by next summer, with the building completed by the end of 2026. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Buffalo Next section of the Buffalo News on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The blizzard that struck across western New York in December 2022 left a mark across the region, killing 47 people, wreaking havoc for days, and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake that will not soon be forgotten. But for Spectrum, its impact on the agency and its clients still lingers more than 3 years later. It's been a huge loss to the behavioral health community in this city, said Melissa L. Farrell, Spectrum's chief operating officer. Spectrum provides outpatient housing support and crisis treatment for people with mental illness and addictions. The agency employs more than 440 people at 16 locations. But the Main Street facility was its flagship site, with about half of the nonprofit agency's operations and 137 employees. Originally constructed in 1914 for the Foster Milburn Company, a pharmaceutical manufacturer whose best-known product was Doan's kidney pills, the 50,000 square foot building was later occupied for over 40 years by Otis Elevator Company. It was acquired by Erie County Medical Center, which housed its downtown clinic in the building before moving it across the street, and was eventually purchased by Spectrum Health in 2015. With 3 floors and a basement, the building housed Spectrum's urgent care clinic and substance abuse counseling, as well as community-based services such as housing, care coordination, a re-entry team for people coming out of jail to get help with housing, medical care, and jobs, and the assertive community treatment program for people who have not succeeded with more traditional techniques. A blizzard of problems. All of that changed abruptly on the morning of December 24th, 2022, when the gusting winds drove a tree branch through the window on the southeast corner of the top floor. The frigid air and blowing snow soon froze 2 sprinkler heads, which shattered and unleashed a steady flow of water. The freeze continued down the water line and blew out a 3/4-inch elbow pipe, worsening the flood dramatically. Quote, "By the time we found out about it, it was hitting the sensors on the ground floor for the windows," said Nick Jerome, Senior Vice President of Finance and Chief Financial Officer. But no one could get downtown until Christmas night, a day and a half later, when Volker came with her husband to turn the water off. By then, Over 140,000 gallons of water had flowed through the building, barreling toward the lowest point in the building, the boiler room in the basement, where its computers were also located. We were just 6 inches from losing the server and 2 inches from losing the boiler. Once the storm subsided, officials were able to turn off the heat and inspect the damage, including some that was caused by looting. Starting over. Executives realized they would have to demolish the entire interior, remediate any mold, and rebuild. Quote, "We knew that there was no way we could have people back in this building, and we provide services that could not be interrupted for people," Farrell said. So Spectrum pivoted quickly to telehealth services and secured 4 additional temporary in-person locations, including next door at 1298 Main, where the Society of St. Vincent de Paul allowed the nonprofit to renovate 4,100 square feet of space on the 3rd floor for its clinic and care coordination team. Moving the clinic next door meant no disruption in transportation for clients who used Metro Bus or walked. But the clinic went from 30,000 square feet over 3 floors to 4,100 square feet on 1 floor. It is operating at half its former capacity without the ability to easily coordinate care across multiple specialties. But the reconstruction also created a long-term opportunity for Spectrum to redesign the building. The tall first floor, which had been a manufacturing space for Otis, was high enough to allow construction of a new second floor, adding an entire additional level of space for the clinic and related services. That will double the clinic's original capacity. Plans now call for the new clinic and health center to occupy the first and second floors, with community-based housing, care coordination, re-entry, and ACT on the 3rd floor. The 4th floor would host other services, as well as community space for meetings and other functions. Officials are still determining how to use the basement. The agency started the work with just less than $6 million in insurance proceeds and a little more than $3 million from its own funds. But the soaring construction expenses drove the total cost to $22 million, and Spectrum was severely short. Officials had applied for additional state grants but hadn't been approved yet, so Spectrum pulled the plug on the work temporarily in December of 2024, while its contractors winterized the building with a $200,000 grant from the Patrick P. Lee Foundation and shut down the site until the agency received a series of state funding awards this summer that will cover the costs and allow work to restart. The next headline under the Startups banner, Coach Me Plus gets $9 million in military contracts. And there's a picture of Kevin Dawadowicz, president and founder of Coach Me Plus, in his office in Buffalo. A Buffalo-based performance technology company has been awarded more than $9 million in federal military contracts from the Defense Department. Coach Me Plus will expand the technology behind the Warrior Performance Platform as part of the military's wider effort to improve soldier readiness, resilience, and long-term health. Another part of the startup's work will be to accelerate the department's human performance and readiness strategy. The significant investment helps support new jobs in Buffalo and deepens an already long-standing national defense partnership that dates back almost a decade. Coach Me Plus continues to increase its workforce and now has 22 employees. The company was a 2015 43 North Startup Contest winner, walking away with $250,000 investment, and started with a clientele that was mainly elite-level athletes. A few years later, the U.S. military started to use the training software to get troops in physical shape for battle. With this latest investment, that relationship has only strengthened. These awards reflect the trust the Department of War has placed in the technology we've built and the holistic health and fitness mission we support, said Kevin Dawadowicz, founder and president of Coach Me Plus. Coach Me Plus was built to advance human performance wherever readiness matters, end quote. The company, founded in 2012, quadrupled its revenue in 2024 compared with the year prior, without disclosing details. Coach Me Plus has worked with teams from every U.S. professional sports league, including the Buffalo Bills and Buffalo Sabres, and some of the top collegiate athletic programs. The business started as a sports company, but Dawadowicz always knew the company could do more than just work with elite athletes. Coach Me Plus is now running programs with the Navy, Air Force, and Army. The company landed its first military contract working with the Navy in 2017 to help recruits meet the required physical fitness standards to enlist. As part of the company's latest military contract, Coach Me Plus will partner with TAG, which works on systems engineering, cybersecurity, data analytics, DevSecOps, user-centered design, and machine learning and artificial intelligence. The project will be funded by the U.S. Army, the Office of the Secretary of the Army, and the National Guard Bureau. The company's work will include the integration of wearable biosensors into initial military training as part of a congressionally mandated analysis, the deployment of the Warrior Performance Platform across 8 Army brigades and several state-level National Guard organizations, and the development of next-generation capabilities. The platform is also being piloted across Navy and Defense Health organizations. In addition to expanding the platform's capabilities and reach, the contracts fund essential cybersecurity operations, ongoing accreditation activities, and content development services to meet the needs of the Army, Navy, and Guard end users. The platform, which is used across military and elite performance organizations, combines real-time data insights, performance management tools, and field-ready applications to support the evolving demands of modern military operations. The company says it has additional hiring plans for 2026, but has not yet finalized its 2026 headcount forecast. Brown & White invests in Miracule. Brown & White Ventures will invest in a Maryland-based biotechnology company founded by a graduate of St. Bonaventure University. The company, Miracule, is developing RNA therapies for various rare neuromuscular diseases with high unmet medical needs. It is a drug design startup that applies genomic patient data to create highly tailored therapeutics to help patients live a life free from the debilitating symptoms of their rare genetic disorders. Anthony Saleh, CEO of Miracule, earned his bachelor's degree in biochemistry at St. Bonaventure in 2001. The startup is the second Brown & White Ventures investment to be led by an alumnus of the university. Brown & White is a venture capital investment fund backed by many St. Bonaventure graduates. As an alumnus of St. Bonaventure University, I am proud to welcome Brown & White as partners in our funding round, Saleh said. Miracule becomes the 6th portfolio company in Brown & White Ventures' first year of venture capital investment. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Sunday, December 7th, 2025 issue of the Viewpoints section and the Buffalo Next section of the Buffalo News. We read from these sections of the Buffalo News every Sunday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been David Frothingham. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the National Enquirer. At 8 p.m., we have People Magazine. And at 9 o'clock, we have the New York Times Book Review. Stay tuned for these readings and more. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or questions, please stay with us. If you're listening to this publication online, you're probably using our website, a podcast player like Spotify or iTunes, a streaming service like Siro, or a smart speaker. Did you know that we now have a dedicated app that can be downloaded to any mobile device, like a smartphone or tablet, for free? App users can conveniently access our live stream and any episode of our podcast easier than ever. To download the app, just type NFRRS in the search window in the Apple App Store or in the Google Play Store. Contact us anytime if you have any questions by calling 716-821-5555, extension 5. Thank you. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low